Would it be bad if I asked my girlfriend to sign a prenup? That question wasn't just a passing thought, it became a shadow that followed me everywhere. It was there when I brushed my teeth in the morning, staring at my own reflection, wondering if I was about to sabotage the best thing in my life. It was there when I was at work, in between meetings, when my brain should have been focused on numbers and deadlines, but instead wandered to what if she takes half. But most of all, it was there at night, when the world was quiet, when my phone was silent, when my girlfriend was asleep beside me, breathing softly. That's when the question hit the hardest. I'd stare at the ceiling, the dark outlines of the room familiar yet suffocating, and I'd hear my own mind whispering, "Are you protecting yourself? Or are you planting the seed of your own breakup?" It felt like I was standing on a thin wire, stretched high above to very different outcomes. On one side, safety, security, knowing that no matter what happened in the future, the things I worked for before this relationship would remain mine. On the other side, love, trust, a future without walls. But if I leaned too far in either direction, would I fall? I'm not a paranoid man by nature. In fact, most people would probably call me cautious, maybe even careful to a fault. At 27, I've spent years building my life piece by piece. My apartment wasn't handed to me, it was the result of long hours, strict budgets, and sacrifice. The cars sitting in the garage weren't just machines to me. They were symbols of discipline and reward. Every dollar in my savings account represented a choice I made to work instead of party, to plan instead of gamble. And yet, all of that, the comfort, the security, the little empire I had quietly built suddenly felt fragile. All it would take was a signature on a marriage license, and in the eyes of the law, mine could become ours. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my girlfriend. That's not in doubt. She's been by my side for 4 years, through the good and the bad. She has this way of filling my apartment with warmth, of making an empty living room feel like home. She's caring, supportive, and she takes on so much of the daily grind around the house that I genuinely appreciate her. But love doesn't erase reality. Love doesn't sign contracts or pay lawyers. Love doesn't guarantee forever, and that's where the question dug its claws into me. Because if I brought up a prenup, what would it say to her? Would she hear, "I don't trust you," instead of, "I'm trying to protect what I built before you"? Would she think I was planning for failure before we even said I do? Would her smile, the one that always made me feel like the luckiest guy alive, twist into suspicion? The thought of hurting her like that made me sick. But the thought of losing everything I'd worked for made me just as sick. I couldn't silence it. I couldn't push it away. Every time she mentioned marriage, when she casually brought up engagement rings, when she sent me photos of wedding venues she thought were cute, when she joked about how many bridesmaids she'd have, I felt the tension rise in my chest. She was dreaming of the future. But I was haunted by the past stories of men I knew who had been blindsided and divorced. So I kept asking myself, would it be bad if I asked her? Would it ruin everything? And the most terrifying part was I didn't know the answer. I'm 27, not rich, but not struggling either. Some people might call it comfortable. But for me, it's more than that. It's the result of years of sacrifice, discipline, and a mindset that never let me take anything for granted. I didn't grow up with much. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't the kind of household where money flowed freely. Vacations were rare. New clothes usually meant clearance racks. And I learned early that if I wanted something, I had to earn it myself. That mindset stuck with me. The apartment I live in now isn't just a roof over my head, it's proof of my persistence. I bought it before I ever met my girlfriend. Every square foot of it represents nights of staying late at the office, weekends of skipping parties so I could save, and months of telling myself, not yet, not until you've earned it. When I hold the keys in my hand, I don't just see a home, I see independence. I see something that's mine, untouchable, something no one can take credit for except me. Then there are my cars. Some people might roll their eyes and say cars are just metal and wheels. But to me, They're more than transportation. They're symbols. One of them is practical, reliable, the kind of car that gets me to work without a fuss. The other? That's my pride. The one I bought after years of saving. The one that makes me feel like all those 70-hour work weeks weren't in vain every time I slide behind the wheel. I remember the version of myself that dreamed of owning it and the satisfaction that I turned that dream into reality. And then, of course, there's my income. I make around $160,000 a year. Again, I'm not a millionaire, but compared to where I started, it feels like I've climbed a mountain. I don't live extravagantly, and I don't throw money around. I like nice things, sure, but I like security. Even more, I like knowing that if something unexpected happens, a medical bill, a job loss, an emergency, I won't be ruined. That safety net is something I built brick by brick, dollar by dollar. The truth is, before my girlfriend came into my life, I was content, not lonely, not desperate content. My days had a rhythm. Work, gym, evenings at home, sometimes catching up with friends. Nothing flashy, but solid. And when I looked at what I had, a home that was mine, cars I'd paid for, savings I could count on, I felt proud. That pride is important to me because it wasn't just about money. It was about effort, about proving to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I could create a life without needing to depend on anyone else. And that's exactly why the thought of marriage without protection shakes me. It's not about greed or mistrust. It's about preserving what I built before she ever entered the picture. My life before her wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability, once you've earned it, isn't something you give away lightly. Then there's my girlfriend. She's 24, and we've been together for 4 years now. 4 years may not sound like a lifetime, but when you share daily routines, birthdays, holidays, and even the quiet, ordinary nights together, it starts to feel like she's woven into the very fabric of your life. She's sweet in ways that are hard to explain, not just in the casual she's nice kind of way, but in the way she remembers the little things like how I take my coffee, or the way she sneaks a sticky note with a smiley face onto my laptop when she knows I'm stressed. She has this natural warmth that makes the apartment feel alive. Before her, my place was just walls and furniture. With her, it feels like home. She's caring too. Sometimes in ways I don't even realize until I stop and think. She keeps track of things I'd never notice: the laundry detergent running low, the small rip in the bedsheet, the groceries that magically appear stocked in the fridge. She's the kind of person who will sit beside me in silence when I've had a bad day, just her presence enough to calm me down. And other times, she's playful and light, pulling me out of my serious headspace with a laugh or a dumb joke that only she could deliver at the right moment. One of the biggest things I can't ignore is how much she contributes around the house. People always talk about value in terms of money, but there are different forms of contribution. She may not bring in a 6-figure salary, but she brings balance. She takes care of the home in a way that frees me up to focus on work, to keep pushing in my career. That's not something I take lightly. It's a partnership of sorts. Even if it doesn't show up in a paycheck, work-wise, she's at a grocery store part-time. It's not glamorous, and honestly, it's not something she loves, but she goes anyway. She covers her bills, buys the things she wants without always leaning on me. And I respect that. She's not lazy. She just doesn't have the same fire for career building that I do. And while part of me wishes she aimed higher, another part of me knows not everyone defines success the same way. What stands out most, though, is her heart. She's loyal. She's been by my side through struggles, and she never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. And for years, we've built memories that are hard to measure in dollars or property value. Movie nights curled under a blanket, road trips in my car with the music too loud, quiet mornings cooking breakfast together. These moments remind me why I fell in love with her in the first place. She may not be chasing promotions or building wealth the way I do, But she's been building something else, a life with me, and deep down, I know that without her, all the money, the apartment, the cars, none of it would feel nearly as meaningful. But here's the catch: my girlfriend loves the good life. Designer bags, fancy dinners, weekend getaways, those things light her up. She never hides it. And in some ways, I admire her for being so open about what she likes. Some people pretend they don't care about material things, but she's honest about it. When she sees a handbag in a store window, her eyes sparkle. When she scrolls through Instagram and sees a couple vacationing on the beach, she shows me with a smile that says, "Someday, us too." And most of the time, I try to give her those experiences. I don't mind taking her to nice restaurants, or planning a trip, or surprising her with a gift. Honestly, I like seeing her happy. I like seeing her proud to show off what we do together. But there's always this little voice in the back of my head reminding me, all of this is coming from me. She's not exactly motive. I didn't just wake up one morning paranoid about marriage. No, the kind of fear doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows, little by little, watered by the things you see and the stories you hear. For me, it started with the men around me, friends I admired, guys I thought had their lives figured out. They were good men, honest, hardworking, loyal, the kind of men who believed in love with their whole hearts. They met women who made them feel alive, who made them believe that marriage was the next natural step. And so they did it. They bought the rings, planned the weddings, stood at the altar with smiles wide enough to fill a room. At first, it looked like the dream was real. Honeymoons, new houses, photos of Sunday brunches and vacations in the mountains. From the outside, it seemed like everything was perfect. But then slowly at first, and then all at once things began to crack. I remember one friend, Jason. He was the kind of guy who would bend over backward to make people happy, especially his wife. He worked overtime to afford a down payment on a nice house for the two of them. For years, he carried that mortgage, proud of the home he built. But when the marriage fell apart, the house wasn't just a house anymore. It became a battleground. In the divorce, he lost it. Years of sweat, savings, and sacrifice vanished with the stroke of a pen. Then there was Marcus. He was the saver in our group, the guy who skipped nights out so he could put money away for the future. By 30, he had built up a solid financial cushion. But after his divorce, half of that savings disappeared overnight. He used to talk about investing, about building something for the future. Now he just talks about trying to catch up, about how he feels like he's starting from zero again. And then there's the story that really sticks with me, the one that dug the fear deepest. My friend David, his divorce didn't just take his house or his savings, it strapped him with spousal support payments that, to this day, he's still making. 5 years later, he's paying for a woman who doesn't even live alone anymore. She's moved in with a new boyfriend. But the court doesn't care. The checks keep going out every month. David laughs about it sometimes, pretending it doesn't bother him. But I see the look in his eyes. He's not free. Watching them go through all of that planted something in me. A warning, a voice in the back of my head saying, this could be you. These weren't reckless guys. They weren't cheaters, liars, or selfish men. They were regular guys who believed in love, who trusted their partners, who thought marriage was a safe bet. And yet they walked away with scars so deep that some of them still haven't healed. That was my first real warning sign, not a statistic, not a horror story on the internet. Real men I knew, sitting across from me with tired faces and empty bank accounts, men who whispered, if I could do it again, I'd do it differently. And that's when I began to wonder if marriage was really the dream I once thought it was, or if it was just a gamble where the house always wins. One friend lost his house, another lost half his savings, and one guy, he's still chained to spousal support 5 years later, while his ex lives comfortably with her new boyfriend. At first, these were just stories I heard over drinks late at night when frustrations came spilling out. But the more I saw it unfold, the more I realized these weren't isolated tragedies, they were cautionary tales written in flesh and blood. I still remember the day Jason told me he had to leave his house. His hands were shaking as he held a cardboard box full of family photos and mismatched kitchenware. He had bought the house with pride, calling it our forever place. It was supposed to be where they'd raise kids, celebrate holidays, and grow old together. But when the marriage fell apart, the court didn't care about who worked harder, who paid the down payment, or who sacrificed more. The house became an asset to be divided, and Jason was left standing on the curb with a box, watching movers carry away furniture he had paid for. That image is burned into my mind, my friend. Once proud and strong, now broken and hollow. Then there was Marcus. His collapse wasn't as dramatic, but it was just as painful. He had spent years building savings, living below his means, investing carefully. I used to tease him for being too frugal, for skipping vacations or saying no to nights out. But that discipline had built him a comfortable cushion, one he thought would support him for life. Divorce shredded it in half. He went from secure to scrambling, from planning for the future to worrying about next month's bills. He told me once, over a beer, "It feels like I'm running a race I already finished, and someone just pushed me back to the starting line." His face said it all. He was exhausted. And then, the most haunting story, David, out of all of them, his situation is the one that made me truly fear marriage. His marriage had been rocky, sure, but when it ended, he thought freedom would follow. Instead, he found himself signing away years of his future in the form of spousal support. The cruel part, his ex-wife moved in with her new boyfriend within a year. David still sends those checks every month, watching his hard-earned money support a life that doesn't include him. Sometimes he jokes about it, like it's just one of life's ironies. But I've seen him staring into his drink, his smile fading when he thinks no one's watching. That isn't freedom. That's a cage without bars. Watching all of this unfold didn't just make me sad, it terrified me. These weren't strangers in news articles or faceless men online. These were my friends, people I grew up with, people who trusted love enough to risk everything. And what did they get in return? Empty houses, broken bank accounts, and futures rewritten against their will. Their stories planted something inside me, a quiet dread I couldn't shake. It whispered every time I thought about marriage. If it happened to them, why wouldn't it happen to you? The more I saw my friends' lives collapse, the more I started asking myself dangerous questions. Questions I didn't want to think about, but couldn't silence. What if that happened to me? It started with my apartment. That place isn't just for walls and a roof, it's a symbol of everything I worked for. I bought it before I ever met her, every brick and tile paid for with my own sweat. I remember the first night I slept there, mattress on the floor, no furniture, just me and a cheap lamp from the thrift store. I felt proud, independent, like I had carved out my own corner of the world. But then the thought crept in, if I got married, would this apartment stop being mine? Would it suddenly become ours? Even though she didn't put in the years of grind to earn it, and worse if things fell apart, could I lose it the same way Jason lost his house? The idea made my stomach turn. Then my mind drifted to my cars. They're not luxury toys, but they mean something to me. I spent weekends under the hood, learning, repairing, maintaining them until they ran smooth as new. Every scratch on my hands, every dollar spent on parts, it was all me. I didn't inherit them. I didn't finance them with someone else's money. I built and maintained them with pride. And yet, in the cold eyes of the law, would those cars become marital property, just another item to split? Would they become bargaining chips in a courtroom when all I ever saw in them was the proof of my hard work? The questions multiplied. What about my savings? What about the small investments I'd been building quietly, little by little, for a secure future? Would those to become community property? Would all the sacrifices I made, late nights working, saying no to vacations, saving when I wanted to spend be wiped away the second a signature tied me to someone else. The more I thought about it, the more vulnerable I felt. It was like standing in a house with unlocked doors, knowing anyone could walk in and take what they wanted. I wanted to believe love was stronger than paperwork. I wanted to trust that commitment meant protection, not risk. But every real-world example I'd seen told me the opposite. The moment you get married, you don't just share love, you share liability. And that's when the fear sank deeper. Because it wasn't about not loving her. It wasn't about doubting her intentions. It was about the system itself. A system I had seen crush good men and strip them of everything they worked for. And I couldn't stop thinking, if it happened to them, why would I be any different? Those what-ifs kept me awake at night. They weren't just questions, they were warnings. Every time my girlfriend brought up marriage, dropping hints about rings, weddings, or what kind of dress she wanted, I felt a war break out inside me. It was subtle at first, like the faint pull of two magnets fighting each other. But the longer it went on, the stronger that tension grew, until it became impossible to ignore. On one side, there was the voice of love, the side that told me, she loves you, trust her, don't ruin something good by letting fear take control. I could see it in her eyes when she talked about our future. She wasn't plotting, she wasn't calculating, she was dreaming. She'd mention a beach wedding, laugh about whether I cry at the altar, or casually point out engagement rings while we passed a jewelry store. Those moments should have filled me with excitement. But instead, they split me down the middle. Because on the other side of me was the whisper, that quiet, sharp voice that said, don't be naive, protect yourself. At first, it was faint, easy to ignore. But with every story I heard, every reminder of my friend's pain, it grew louder, more insistent. It told me that love is real, yes, but so are courtrooms, lawyers, and settlements. It reminded me that love can change, and when it does, it often takes you. That night, the living room felt unusually heavy, even though nothing out of the ordinary was happening. The glow of the TV flickered across the walls, filling the silence with canned laughter from a sitcom I wasn't really watching. She was curled up beside me, relaxed, her legs tucked under a blanket. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would have seemed like a picture of comfort to people enjoying a quiet evening together. But inside me, it was chaos. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly that I could barely focus on what was happening on the screen. Every second that passed felt like an opportunity slipping away. And yet, the thought of speaking up made my throat tighten. My palms were slick with sweat. I kept rubbing them against my jeans, hoping she wouldn't notice how restless I'd become. I told myself over and over, honesty now is better than regret later. Say it now before it's too late. Better to risk the storm tonight than let silence build into something worse. The problem was, this wasn't just any conversation. It was the conversation, the one that could change everything, the one that might split us in two if I wasn't careful with my words. I glanced at her, and for a moment, I almost lost my nerve. She looked so peaceful, laughing softly at the TV. How could I ruin that? How could I drop something so heavy into a night that was supposed to be light? But then again, how could I not? The longer I waited, the more dishonest it felt, like I was building our future on shaky ground. My chest grew tighter with every passing moment. I leaned back, tried to steady my breathing, and rehearsed what I might say. I imagined different versions of the conversation, some that ended with her understanding, others that ended with her slamming the door. The second version always scared me more, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Finally, I picked up the remote and pressed mute. The sudden silence was deafening. She turned to me, her eyes curious, eyebrows lifting slightly as though she could already sense something was coming. Hey, I managed, my voice cracking in a way I hadn't intended. I cleared my throat, but the shakiness lingered. Can we talk about something serious? The words hung between us, heavier than I expected. My stomach twisted as I saw her expression shift. She sat up straighter, pulling the blanket tighter round herself. There was an unmistakable spark in her eyes, one of anticipation, of excitement. In that instant, my heart sank. I knew what she thought was happening. She thought I was about to propose, and the guilt hit me like a punch, because what I was about to say wasn't the promise of forever she had imagined. It was a condition, a wall, a test. I swallowed hard, knowing there was no turning back now. Her eyes instantly lit up, and that single look nearly shattered me. I didn't need words to understand what she thought was happening. The way her breath hitched, the way she shifted on the couch, straightening her posture, tucking her hair behind her ear, it was all there. She thought I was about to propose. And in a way, she wasn't wrong. Marriage was exactly what I wanted to. But what I was about to say wasn't a promise wrapped in romance. It was a condition wrapped in caution. The two don't mix well. Her entire face softened, her lips parting in quiet anticipation. I could practically see her playing out the scene in her mind, me dropping to one knee, pulling out a ring, whispering the words she'd been waiting to hear. My chest tightened with guilt so sharp it almost felt physical. I hated myself in that moment, hated that I was about to let her down, hated that the happiness lighting up her face would soon collapse into something else. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing the words into order. Don't stall now, I told myself. You can't back out just because she looks happy. If you delay this conversation, it'll only hurt more later. I took a slow breath, let it out carefully, and began. So, my voice cracked, and I quickly cleared my throat, trying again. You know, we've been talking about marriage, and I want that too. I really do. Her smile widened, her eyes sparkling with a joy that stabbed me right through the heart. I forced myself to continue. But there's something I need to be upfront about. The sparkle dimmed slightly. She leaned in, listening closely, as though bracing for some kind of secret. I swallowed hard. My palms were sweating again. But there was no going back. If we do get married, I said, each word deliberate, I'd want us to sign a prenup. The change was instant. Her smile froze, then fell. Her eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. Her body stiffened. And for the first time all evening, she pulled slightly away from me. A prenup, she repeated, her voice sharp with a tone I had never heard from her before. The warmth that had filled the room moments ago drained out, replaced by a cold tension that pressed against my chest. I could feel the weight of her stare, like she was searching my face for some sign that I was joking. But was and single quotes T. Inside, I was breaking. I wanted to take the words back, to rewind the last 10 seconds and start over. But I couldn't. The truth was out now, and the damage had already begun. Her expression said it all. What she had been expecting was a promise of forever. What she got instead was a reminder that forever isn't guaranteed. And in that gap between expectation and reality, I could feel the first crack forming in us. Her smile disappeared so quickly, it was almost violent, like a candle snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind. 1 second, the room was glowing with her anticipation, and the next it felt as though someone had opened a window in the dead of winter. The warmth vanished. Her voice cut through the silence, sharp and brittle. A prenup, she repeated, her tone almost disbelieving, like the word itself was foreign coming from my mouth. You mean you don't trust me? The accusation in her voice landed like a blow to the chest. My gut twisted, and suddenly I couldn't sit still. I shifted, rubbing my palms against my thighs, searching desperately for the right words, for any way to undo the damage that had just been unleashed. No, it's not that, I stammered, my words tumbling over one another. It's not about trust. I worked really hard for what I had before we got together. The apartment, the cars, the savings, I built all of that before us. And I want to make sure those stay separate. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening with every word I spoke. Each explanation only seemed to deepen the divide. I pressed on, desperate to make her understand. It's not about us right now. It's about protecting both of us in case something ever happens. Think of it like insurance. You don't get car insurance because you want to crash, you get it just in case. That's all this is. Just in case. But even as the words left my mouth, I could tell they were failing. The metaphor, the logic, the calm reasoning, it all crumbled in the face of raw emotion. Because for her, this wasn't numbers on paper or property lines. For her, it was personal. Her lips trembled. Her voice low but laced with venom. So, you're planning for us to fail? The question pierced the ear, heavy with betrayal. I froze. That was the very fear I had been trying to avoid. I wanted to tell her no, that failure wasn't the plan, that I loved her enough to marry her, that this was simply about caution, about responsibility. But all of that sounded hollow in my head. Excuses dressed up as love. I could see her pulling away from me, not physically, not yet, but emotionally. The light in her eyes was dimming, replaced by something colder, suspicion, hurt, and maybe even resentment. My heart sank. I had spent weeks building up the courage for this conversation, convincing myself that honesty would make us stronger. Yet here we were, standing on opposite sides of a canyon that seemed to open wider with every word. Her silence stretched out, louder than anything I could say. She wasn't convinced. She wasn't reassured. She wasn't soothed. She was wounded, and in that moment, for the first time, I realized that a single word prenup had the power to unravel everything we had built together. I tried to explain. God, I tried. My words came out in fragments, rushed, desperate. I told her about my friends' men I knew who thought their marriages would last forever, only to watch everything they had worked for vanish in divorce settlements. I painted the picture of messy breakups, courtrooms filled with bitterness, and how a simple prenup could have spared them years of financial ruin and regret. I even reached again for the metaphor I thought would make it click. It's like insurance, I said, pleading with my eyes for her to see reason. You don't buy car insurance because you want to crash, you buy it just in case something happens. It's protection, not expectation. But she wasn't hearing me anymore. Her expression hardened, her lips trembling as her eyes filled with tears. So, what? Everything I've done for us means nothing, she snapped, her voice breaking in anger and grief. I've been here for you. I've taken care of this place. I've supported you through everything, and now you're treating me like some gold digger. The word hung in the air like a slap. Gold digger, that's what she thought I saw when I looked at her. That's what she thought I was accusing her of being. My chest caved in. No, that's not at all, I insisted, my voice raw. You're not that. You've never been that. This isn't about you, it's about me, about my fears, about making sure we're both protected. Please, don't twist it into something it's not. But the more I tried to untangle it, the more tangled it became. The conversation spiraled, looping back on itself, each round more heated than the last. She raised her voice, accusing me of doubting her, of insulting everything we had built together. I raised mine without meaning to, trying to defend myself, trying to convince her that love and caution could coexist. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her sobs cutting through every word I spoke. At one point, she buried her face in her hands, shaking her head like she couldn't even look at me. And I just sat there helpless, frozen, feeling like the worst man alive. I wanted to reach for her, to wipe her tears, to tell her none of this meant I loved her any less. But every time I moved closer, she seemed to recoil further away, as if the prenup itself had created a wall between us. I could feel something cracking inside me, something vital, because beneath all the arguing, beneath all the tears and explanations, a sickening realization was taking root in the pit of my stomach. The truth was simple, brutal, undeniable. If she couldn't accept the prenup, then this wasn't just a fight we could patch up in the morning. This wasn't just a disagreement that time and apologies would smooth over. This might be the deal breaker. And the thought of losing her because of a single document was enough to make me wonder if love and protection could ever truly live in the same place. The days after that conversation were brutal. Silence became her weapon of choice. She moved around the house like a ghost, present but unreachable, her footsteps quiet, her eyes avoiding mine. When she did speak, her words were clipped, cold, and deliberate as though each syllable was designed to cut me down. It wasn't just silence, it was punishment. The contrast was staggering. Not long ago, our home had been filled with laughter, small jokes over morning coffee, little touches. When we passed each other in the kitchen, the casual ease of two people who felt safe together. Now, it felt like I was living with a stranger. Even the walls seemed colder, as if the very air had absorbed the tension between us. Meals became an exercise in discomfort. She would cook for herself, sometimes leaving me out entirely, other times placing a plate in front of me without a word. We'd sit at the table, the clinking of utensils louder than usual because nothing else filled the silence. I found myself eating quickly, just to escape the heaviness pressing down on us. At night, the distance grew worse. We still shared the same bed, but it felt like a canyon had opened between us. She turned her back to me as soon as she lay down, pulling the blanket tied around her shoulders like a shield. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the argument in my head. Should I have explained it differently? Should I have softened my words? But then the anger would flare up again. Why did I even need to defend wanting to protect what I'd worked for? Her silence wasn't just about the prenup anymore. It was a test of endurance, a way of making me feel the weight of her disappointment without ever saying it outright. And it worked. Every day, the guilt gnawed at me. Even though I knew I wasn't wrong. At one point, I tried to bridge the gap. I walked into the living room where she was scrolling aimlessly on her phone and said, "Can we talk? This silence is killing me." She looked up, met my eyes for a brief second, and then returned her gaze to the screen. "What's there to talk about? You already made up your mind." That one sentence crushed me more than her silence. It wasn't just that she disagreed, it was that she had decided I was immovable, that nothing I said could change how she felt. And maybe she was right, but the way she dismissed me, like I was some immovable wall she no longer wanted to touch, left me feeling lonelier than I had in years. The house, once a place of comfort, became suffocating. I started staying out later after work, driving around aimlessly, stopping for coffee at places I never usually went, just to avoid going home too soon. I told myself I needed time to think. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear the silence that waited for me behind our front door. And yet, no matter how far I drove, no matter how long I stayed away, the same thought followed me everywhere. If this is how she handles conflict now, what will marriage look like? One evening, after days of silence thick enough to choke on, she finally spoke. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but not really absorbing anything on the screen. When she walked in, her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together, and her eyes red rimmed and shining told me she'd been crying long before she came into the room. She didn't sit beside me. Instead, she stood at the edge of the living room, clutching her phone in both hands like it was keeping her upright. Her voice was fragile when she finally spoke, but it carried a sharp edge. "If you really loved me, you wouldn't even think about a prenup." The words hit me like a sucker punch. I had expected anger, maybe more cold silence, but not this. This was worse. It wasn't just an argument about paperwork anymore. She was tying my love for her directly to my willingness to risk everything I had worked for. For a moment, I just stared at her, stunned. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her how unfair that was, how manipulative it felt. But part of me was too shaken to respond right away. Because as much as I hated to admit it, her words hurt deeply. I love her. I really do. That's why I was even considering marriage in the first place. But what she was saying, that love meant blind trust, that love meant abandoning caution, wasn't something I could agree with. Love, to me, wasn't about ignoring reality. It was about facing it together. Honestly, when I finally found my voice, it came out quieter than I expected. "That's not fair," I said. Loving you doesn't mean I have to pretend money doesn't exist. It doesn't mean I should put myself at risk. You think this prenup means I don't trust you. But it's not about you, it's about protecting myself if life doesn't go the way we hope. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. You don't get it. All I hear is that you're planning for us to fail before we even start. How am I supposed to feel wanted or secure when you've already drawn a line between us? Her voice cracked on that last word and the sound of it twisted my chest. I wanted to cross the room, pull her into my arms, and make it all better. But I didn't move, because deep down, I knew if I gave in to that impulse, I'd be abandoning my instincts, and my instincts had kept me safe in every part of my life so far. I sat there, torn, the weight of her accusation pressing down on me. I loved her, but I also loved myself enough to protect what I had bled for, sacrificed for, worked years for, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Our definitions of love might never align. Her tears were real. My fear was real. And between the two, a wall was growing higher by the day. The thought kept gnawing at me, refusing to let go no matter how much I tried to silence it. If she truly loved me, if her intentions were as pure as she said, then why resist something as straightforward as a prenup? All it said was that what I had earned before marriage stayed mine. It didn't erase the future we were supposed to build together. It didn't stop us from sharing new experiences, new successes, new joys. So why fight it? That question became a drumbeat in my mind, relentless and unshakable. The more I replayed it, the more suspicious I became. I didn't want to be suspicious of her. God, I wanted to trust her more than anything. But every time she cried, every time she lashed out, every time she pulled away from me instead of working with me, it chipped away at the foundation of what I thought we had. The tension between us grew unbearable. The house felt like a war zone where no battles were fought out loud, but every silence was a grenade waiting to explode. I would come home from work and feel the air tighten as soon as I opened the door. She would glance at me, expression unreadable, and go back to whatever she was doing. And in those moments, I felt like I was living with a stranger. I tried to distract myself, burying myself in work, going out with friends, even spending more time at the gym. But no matter where I went, the heaviness followed me. At night, when the lights were off and she was turned away from me in bed, my thoughts became darker. I started to wonder, maybe this is the end. Maybe we're not meant to survive this. For the first time since falling in love with her, I seriously considered breaking things off. The idea sat in my chest like a stone. I imagined packing a bag, moving into a small apartment, starting over. It wasn't what I wanted, but it also wasn't as terrifying as I thought it would be. And that realization scared me more than anything else. Because if I could picture life without her, maybe my heart was already pulling away. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I asked myself a brutal question. Do I love her more than I fear losing everything I've worked for? The silence of the room didn't offer an answer. But the fact that I even had to ask told me something was already broken. The breaking point wasn't one explosive fight, one screaming match, or one dramatic walkout. It was quieter than that, like a slow unraveling. It was the moment I realized I couldn't keep carrying both her resentment and my fear. Something had to give. And if she wasn't willing to understand where I was coming from, then maybe, just maybe, the person I had planned to spend forever with wasn't really my forever after all. Then one night, after what felt like weeks of unbearable silence, she walked into the living room where I was sitting alone. I had the TV on, but the volume was low, more for background noise than anything else. My mind wasn't on the screen, it was on her, on us, on the question of whether our relationship had already reached its breaking point. When she entered, I almost didn't notice at first. She didn't stomp in with anger or come rushing with accusations. She moved quietly, her step soft, hesitant, almost fragile. Without a word, She sat down beside me. That in itself was different lately. She'd been keeping as much distance as possible, retreating into other rooms, into herself. I glanced over at her, and my chest tightened instantly. Her eyes were swollen and red from crying, her face pale. She looked exhausted not just physically, but emotionally, like the fight had drained everything out of her. For a moment, I wanted to reach for her hand, but I stopped myself. I didn't know if she would accept the gesture or pull away like she had so many times before. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke, so soft I almost didn't catch the words. "I don't like this," she whispered. "It makes me feel like you think I'm with you for your money." I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued before I could. Tears welled up in her eyes again as she added, "But I don't want to lose you. So if this is what you need to feel secure, I'll sign it." For a moment, the weight of her words just hung in the air between us. I let them sink in slowly, afraid to move, afraid to say the wrong thing. Relief washed over me. Yes, but not for the reason I thought it would. It wasn't about her agreeing to the prenup. It was about what her willingness meant. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something beyond the anger and the silence. I saw love. I saw vulnerability. I saw a woman who was scared of being misunderstood, but who still valued us enough to bend rather than break. My heart softened instantly. I realized how hard this must have been for her to swallow her pride, to admit her fear, to offer a compromise, when everything inside her probably wanted to scream no. That mattered to me more than the prenup itself. I reached out then, slowly, carefully, and took her hand. She didn't pull away this time. Her fingers were trembling, but they wrapped round mine. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick. "Not for signing it, but for meeting me halfway. That means everything." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, and for the first time in weeks, the tension between us cracked. It wasn't gone, not completely, but in that moment, I knew we still had a chance. Because love isn't about never disagreeing, it's about finding a way forward even when the road feels impossible. And that night, sitting side by side in silence that finally felt less heavy, I realized something important. She was willing to compromise, and so was I. We ended up going through with the prenup. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It came after weeks of tense conversations, long silences, and nights where we both lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this single piece of paper would be the thing that broke us apart before we even said, "I do." Walking into that lawyer's office felt heavier than I expected. The walls were lined with shelves of thick law books, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and formality, and I could feel my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't the kind of romantic step people imagine when they think of engagement and wedding planning. There were no flowers, no champagne, no smiles of pure joy. Instead, it was contracts, clauses, and signatures, the unglamorous side of love that most couples never talk about. The lawyer, to his credit, was calm and professional. He asked us both questions separately and together, making sure there was no pressure, no manipulation, just clear understanding. He explained, point by point, what each section of the prenup meant. My apartment protected, my cars protected, my premarital savings and investments protected. Anything that existed before we stood at the altar was mine to keep. But at the same time, anything we built together from the day we married would belong to both of us equally. That was the key. It wasn't about cutting her out or treating her like an outsider. It was about drawing a line between the life I had built before her and the life we were about to build together. And that distinction mattered more than I could put into words. Still, I won't lie, sitting there across from her, hearing legal terms define what ours and mine would mean, was gut-wrenching. Every so often, I'd glance at her face, trying to read what she was feeling. Sometimes she looked guarded, her lips pressed together tightly as if she was holding back words she didn't want to say in front of the lawyer. Other times, I caught a flicker of relief in her eyes, as though she was realizing this wasn't about shutting her out, but about being clear from the start when it came time to sign. My hand hesitated above the paper. It wasn't because I doubted the decision, but because I understood the weight of that moment. This was at the point where love and reality collided. She picked up her pen too, and without a word, she signed. The sound of her pen scratching across the paper was louder in my head than anything else in that room. We left the office quietly. No celebration, no high fives, no smiles, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that signaled the end. It was the silence of two people who had just done something incredibly difficult, something that tested trust, patience, and Krajan walked out still side by side. And as I drove us home, I realized the prenup wasn't a wall between us. It was a foundation, a harsh, unromantic, but necessary foundation that would let us build without fear. Was it easy? No. It was one of the hardest chapters of our relationship, not because either of us wanted to fight, but because the subject itself, money, trust, and the possibility of failure cuts deep. Talking about those things feels like holding a mirror to your relationship and forcing yourself to ask questions you'd rather ignore. I remember the first few nights we tried to talk about it at home. She sat on the couch, arms folded tightly across her chest, and I sat in the chair across from her, trying to find the right words. Every sentence I spoke seemed to land wrong. If I said, I just want to protect myself, it sounded selfish. If I said, it's not about you, it's about the future, it sounded cold and distant. And when I used the word prenup, it felt like I was stabbing the air between us with something sharp. She would ask questions I didn't have good answers for. So you don't trust me? Is that it? Or, if you already think we might fail, why marry me at all? Those questions broke me, because I knew she deserved answers that went beyond logic and legalities. But all I had to give her was my honesty, that my fears didn't come from her. They came from the world I had seen, from friends who had lost everything, from stories of marriages that collapsed in courtrooms instead of living rooms. The hardest part was admitting my own vulnerability. Money wasn't just money to me. It represented years of sacrifice, discipline, and building a future I could stand on. Asking her to sign a prenup wasn't about doubting her. It was about not wanting to lose myself if the worst ever happened. Saying that out loud was like peeling back armor I didn't want to remove. She, in turn, revealed her own fears. She confessed that the idea of a prenup made her feel disposable, as if I was preparing for the day she wouldn't matter anymore. It wasn't just about dollars and assets, it was about dignity, about love, about the fear of being reduced to terms on a contract. Hearing that hurt. It hurt because I loved her, and the last thing I wanted was for her to feel like a liability in my life. But here's the thing, those conversations, as painful as they were, changed us. We had cried, we had yelled, we had sat in silence, staring at each other with more questions than answers. Yet, every time we came back to the table, we didn't run. We didn't bury the problem under fake smiles. We faced it, and in facing it, we found something unexpected and honesty that ran deeper than any vow we could make on a wedding day. We weren't just talking about love anymore. We were talking about survival, about fairness, about how to make sure we both felt safe in the years ahead. It was raw, it was ugly at times, but it was real, and it was in that realness, in those brutally honest talks, that we began to understand each other better than we ever had before. In the end, it made us stronger. That was the last thing I expected when the word prenup first left my lips. I thought it would divide us, maybe even destroy us. But instead, it forced us to step into the uncomfortable truth that love, by itself, isn't enough. I had always been a romantic at heart. I grew up believing that if you loved someone deeply enough, everything else would somehow fall into place. That's what movies, books, and fairy tales tell you, right? That love conquers all. But sitting across from my fiancé with a legal document between us, I realized something love stories never mention. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't stop creditors from calling. Love doesn't shield you from losing your house or your savings if things go wrong. What I learned through the process is simple. Marriage is more than a romance. It is also a partnership in the most practical sense of the word. It is a legal bond, one recognized and enforced by the courts. And when the government is involved in your union, when contracts and property and shared accounts come into play, then treating marriage as only an emotional bond is naive. That realization stung. It felt almost cynical to think of marriage in those terms. But once I faced it, I began to see it differently. Safeguards don't diminish love, they protect it. Just like seatbelts don't mean you want to crash, and health insurance doesn't mean you want to get sick. A prenup doesn't mean you expect to fail. It just means you are being honest about the fact that life is unpredictable and people change. The irony is, the more I embraced that perspective, the more my love for her deepened. Because instead of relying on blind optimism, I was choosing her with both eyes open. I wasn't just saying, I'll love you forever. I was saying, I want to make sure we are both safe, no matter what forever looks like. That, to me, was a truer, more grounded kind of love. And strangely, the prenup gave me peace. I stopped carrying the quiet fear that had been haunting me since the day I decided to propose. I no longer worried about losing everything I had worked for. I no longer felt the need to tiptoe around the topic of money. I could breathe. And when you can breathe in a relationship, you can love more freely, more openly, without resentment or suspicion lurking in the background. So yes, love is important, essential, even, but love without clarity, without boundaries, without safeguards, is fragile. What I learned is that marriage should be built on both the fire of passion and the foundation of practicality. One without the other will eventually collapse, and in that moment, I knew we had both chosen not just love, but wisdom. Asking for a prenup doesn't mean you're planning for failure. That's the misconception that nearly tore me apart during this journey. For so long, I believed that if I even hinted at the word prenup, I would be sending the message that I doubted her, or worse, that I was already expecting our marriage to fail. But that's not what it meant at all. What it really meant was this: I was being realistic. I was being smart. I was protecting both of us. Life is unpredictable. People change. And circumstances shift in ways no one can predict. You don't buy home insurance because you hope your house will burn down. You don't sign up for health insurance because you want to get sick. You do those things because you understand that hope alone is not a plan. And in the same way, asking for a prenup wasn't about expecting failure, it was about being prepared for whatever the future might hold. So, would it be bad to ask my girlfriend to sign a prenup? No, absolutely not. What would be bad is pretending that money doesn't matter, that assets don't matter, that years of work and sacrifice can just be tossed aside in the name of blind trust. What would be bad is ignoring reality, burying your head in the sand, and then waking up one day with nothing left because you avoided an uncomfortable conversation. I learned that pretending problems don't exist doesn't make them go away. It only makes them bigger when they finally catch up to you. And that's the trap so many couples fall into. They treat money as a taboo subject, something unromantic that shouldn't be talked about. But here's the truth. If you can't talk openly about money with your partner, then you're not ready to get married. Period. Our prenup conversation was one of the hardest talks of my life. It brought out our insecurities, our fears, and our doubts. At times, it even made us question whether we were right for each other. But here's the thing, those talks didn't break us, they strengthened us. Because once we pushed through the discomfort, once we stripped away the layers of fear, what was left was raw honesty. And honesty is what sustains a marriage. Not the pretty vows you say on the wedding day, not the flowers or the rings, but the ability to look each other in the eye and tell the truth, even when it hurts. When we finally signed that prenup, something shifted inside me. I felt lighter. She felt lighter. The tension that had been hanging over us was gone, and in its place was something stronger than before, an understanding that our love wasn't built on denial or avoidance, but on courage. Courage to face reality, to protect ourselves, and to protect each other. Sometimes, the hardest talks are the ones that save you in the long run. They are the conversations that test you, shake you, and make you confront things you'd rather leave in the dark. But if you can survive them together, you come out the other side with a bond that's almost unbreakable. For me, that talk changed everything. It didn't just give me peace of mind about my finances, it gave me peace of mind about us. Because if we could face this, if we could walk into a lawyer's office and come out still holding hands, then I knew we could face anything. So no, asking for a prenup isn't bad. Avoiding the truth, pretending love alone will shield you from reality, that's what's bad. The prenup wasn't the end of romance. It was the beginning of trust on a deeper, more grounded level. And that, I realized, is what marriage is really about.